Well, hello, and welcome to this takeover episode of Words and Nerds. We're taking over. We're in here. It's our episode today. No, I kid. I'm Wasiliev. No, I'm Nick Wasiliev. Usually, you can catch me over on another show on this channel, which is called Date with a Debut. But I'm especially excited because I get to chat about a new book from fellow Novocastrian Lake Macquarie cohabitant Alicia Thompson. Originally, she published her debut, Something Else, in 2021. But we're here today to talk about her new haunting story, X, which is published by Nine Star Press, which is just come out. It's been out for only a couple of weeks at the time of us recording. We will discuss a few very mild spoilers and plot points. We will not spoil the ending. I know Alicia's giving me the look. We're not allowed to spoil that ending. We won't. So if you are listening, I suggest you grab a copy down in the description. Or at least read it very, very soon. And lastly, I'll preface this conversation by saying that this book does contain adult content, references to child abuse, depictions of death. So reader and listener discretion is definitely advised. Alicia, welcome to Words and Nerds.
So good to see you again, Nick.
I know. It's been a while. We had a coffee a little while ago back in Toronto. It feels like forever.
I know. It was celebrating the release of your book and talking about mine. I mean, that was nearly post-COVID. I mean, it's a lifetime ago, isn't it?
I know. It does feel like such a different time. Even just getting out and about it felt like such a strange beast just to be like, is this what we used to do? My God, still feels weird. But yeah, it's always a privilege for me to chat with authors from my local area. I love doing it and, promoting that space. And what I've particularly enjoyed about your work so far is I love how you focus on very difficult subject matter and feelings and dive into different genres with it. I mean, Something Else covered a gay romance, but I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a romance, the actual book itself. There's a lot more to it than that.
I called it a love story, but yeah, I thought of it more as literature exploring grief and struggles with coming out and sexuality and city versus country issues. There was a lot going on, but of course Amazon has to class it as something, so it had to be romance, and that was a bit off-putting for some people because they're like, this isn't a romance.
No, I wouldn't call it a romance. And similarly, X is kind of similar. I mean, that topic of grief is still very much front and center. There's difficult themes. You're focusing it around the crime and mystery genre a little bit as well. Why is tackling tough subject matter or the subjects of grief specifically something that you have really kind of focused in on with your writing so far?
Well, they do say write about what you know, but they also say write about what you don't know to find out. So I think any writer's got things they're struggling with to either deal with in themselves, or they're trying to understand something in the outer world and they approach that topic to try and get their head around what people feel when they're going through certain things. I have never had children, and I have had to put myself in the position of parents, people who've lost children. And it's a writer's job to do that. You have to put yourself in other people's positions, and you have to totally immerse yourself in that emotion and really feel it yourself. And I think if you are really feeling it yourself and immersing it in yourself, you can replicate it for other people who either have felt it or giving a different take on it, or showing people like me that have never had children, this is what it would be like. And there's other aspects in the novel too, being falsely accused of crimes or being sucked into a situation where you're linked to a crime and you did nothing to deserve that. So there's all those sorts of emotions and volatility going on in this book. But I do find grief interesting, and I think it's getting a lot of coverage in media and things at the moment. I don't know whether it's the aging population, but books like, Charlotte Wood's Stoneyard Devotional, other books have come out. I think people are interested in exploring the loss of loved ones,
There's an amazing podcast and book as well that a colleague of mine from Booktopia used to turn me on to a while ago, because she had lost one of her parents at a very young age. It's called the Good Morning Podcast, Morning, Mourning, run by two really incredible women who have really highlighted, and I think from listening to several episodes have really kind of gone, this is a normal thing. This is a normal, like, it shouldn't have any sort of stigma attached to it. You can examine these topics and subjects with honesty and kindness. Everyone grieves, everyone mourns. It's not isolated to humans either. Animals can grieve, animals can mourn.
Right.
See it all the time. Talk about it, own up to it. It is, it's something worth talking about, because at the end of the day, we're all on this planet together, and we're all in that experience of living together. So it's going to come up whether you like it or not.
You'd be familiar with the Grieve Project with Hunter Writers Centre too, Nick. So there's another example, and that anthology comes out every year.
Yeah. Before we dive headlong into this book and talk about this subject matter a little bit more, the book came out on September 24th. We're talking about it right now in October, early October. How's the reaction been so far to the book? Have you seen any reviews? Have you seen any people go, wow, this is, got my attention?
Well, I have had some reviews on Instagram, and I've got some very good beta readers that gave me feedback while I was perfecting the final draft. So it was good to get that feedback. I'm not with a major publisher, so I'm having to hustle for the reviews, and they're still coming in at the moment. But I have had a few, and I've had people say that it was a page turner, and they were not sure what had happened till the final end of the story, which is good, because when you're in it so long, you think, it must be obvious, people will know, but everyone reads differently, and it's great to see those different audiences, how they react to a story from a different perspective. So you do get it, and look, this is why you get bad reviews and good reviews, because everybody's different, and you have to take those bad reviews as either something you ignore because they're vicious, or something that's actually giving you some constructive feedback that you need to learn from, and that's not a bad thing either. But it is nice to get people saying that they're enjoying it, and I have so far, so cross fingers.
Yeah, I've kept an eye on one or two of the reviews, and I particularly one talking about the shocking conclusion, which I know I'm like, oh yes, good. I'm very glad you kept that vague, which we will continue. We'll continue with on this particular podcast here. No spoilers for that ending at all. Because long and the short of it is, if you're listening, go read it, because it is good. So similar to Date with a Debut, we like to start with a book pitch. And I think that is an appropriate place to dive into this episode as well for this particular takeover. So, for all of the listeners, what is X about?
Well, it's crime, as you've been pointing out, but it's also got a ghostly element, a bit of paranormal happening. We've got an Australian protagonist, and if you like London, there's quite a few London scenes and northern UK scenes. So that's sort of reflecting my experience of having lived there myself. I utilised all the places that I've been to and lived in, which was fun, and it was wonderful to relive those. But I've got my protagonist. She's lost her son, and she's come back to London to grieve, because that's the site of his last days. He was a mad keen soccer player. And this young boy befriends her, and it takes a while, but she realises this young boy is no longer with us. And he is trying to tell her something, and she starts to piece it together. And when she realises that there's other missing boys in the history of her time in Hampstead Heath, she starts to get very nervous about what's really happening here. And in her grief counselling group, the rector, Joanne Dysart, she introduces Adele to somebody who's likewise in the sessions and happens to be a detective sergeant who is very interested in these cold cases. So they start comparing notes and getting together over this, and between them they uncover something rather ugly. So it progresses from there.
Oh, what a pitch. Nailed it. Oh, that's juicy. You've been working on that, haven't you? It's true. But again, there are so many elements to this story. There are so many things that you can unpack. The themes that immediately jumped out to me are how much the damage events of the past can do to people, that world of grief. But also, as you allude to later in the story, the support that can come from those events. And one of the first images that really stuck out in my head as I was reading this book is Adele visiting Hampstead Heath. I mean, I've been to Hampstead Heath myself. I'm very familiar with that setting and that environment. You visit those local playing fields and is sitting on a bench where she once took her son, Toby. And she's clearly in a headspace of going, she's not really living, she's going through the motions of living in an attempt to try and reconnect with a time that just feels so distant and departed and separate. And then Charlie comes and sits next to her. All of this, there's different things also element in there. I mean, there's even a little bit of a streak of romance in there, but also love in many different forms. And that kind of also sat through this story. What drew you? I mean, you mentioned that you kind of grew up around that area, or you lived in that area for a while, but what drew you to this particular setting of Hampstead Heath, and also this particular place to tell this particular story?
I suppose London holds a lot of romance for me. It's hard for me to explain, Nick, because I have a scrap of paper where I wrote this scene with Adele and Charlie. It was an isolated brain fart, if you like, and I can't even remember where it came from. It could have been a dream. This happens to me a little bit. I wake up in the morning and just go, wow, and I write it down. And I was going through my folders regularly going, what have I got here? What have I got here? And every time I saw this, I thought, it grabbed me, and I thought, I must do something with this. And I must have had that thought 3 or 4 times until I thought, you know what? Charlie deserves some explanation here. What's going on here? Because it was a very small fragment, and I knew in my heart that Charlie was a ghost, but I didn't mention it. And I knew that Adele had lost her son. And I thought, there's got to be a story here. And it just poured out from there. And I think it just felt natural. Hampstead Heath, if you read a lot of crime, British crime, there's a lot of murders set around the Heath because it's a very atmospheric place, provides a lot of opportunity. Like Barry Maitland, he's written a book there that I read that I found very interesting. But many authors have. So, look, there's lots of opportunity to use it as a setting. And my time in London, it was a time for me to relive my joy of being there too. I think that's what we do when we write. We want to revisit things that we loved as well as things that make us think or scare us as well. And we're exploring that, and you do gloss it up a bit because of course you do with your memories, because you love something and it's like it becomes bigger than, Quo Vadis, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there was certainly the appearance of Hampstead Heath, particularly in this particular setting. I mean, it can take many forms. I think its location to such a big city and such a big place that is London, it invites that sort of evocative inspiration and location. I want to focus a little bit. We've talked about Adele and Charlie. Of course, Charlie is the spoiler of is that he is in fact not there in this particular setting. But Adele, again, she's her marriage. She's kind of dealing with the loss of her child in Toby. Her marriage has ended, finding ways to pick herself up after the kind of the hand that life has thrown her. And what I did first of all love about this is you have the voice and the perception from her standpoint. It is just so devastating to see someone in that position. As you are the reader, you are automatically rooting for her because she has been kicked to the curb in a brutal fashion. Leading up to the events that take place in X. And even though there is little tidbits that you throw in here about Charlie, just the moment Charlie shows up and joins her on that bench and says he remembers her son. He remembers he's kind of that weird bridge and connection to that life that she once had that just seems such a distant memory now. It starts a key process for her. as well. And it's not just the process of, I don't think, you know, with ghosts and particularly that kind of setting, sometimes people might say, oh, you're bullshitting yourself, because they might be, you know, cynical around the idea of ghosts, or cynical around the idea of the afterlife, or that kind of environment.
Yep.
But it is also a process of understanding and coming to terms with, first of all, mortality, your grief, and the fact that often there is life after death. Life will continue on, whether you're here as a part of it or not. Tell me about these two. There's a process of moving on in there. Just tell me about these two particular characters.
I hear what you're saying. It's I don't really, whether you believe in these things or not, however you reach your resolution and your way of coming at peace, if you can do that, who's to question it? If it works for you, it works, right? And the cynics and the people that are out there, well, you know, I've been to clairvoyance and things myself, and I've had very convincing things about people in my life that I've lost, and so convincing that I just think, how could this be made up? It is so specific and accurate. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter, because it gave my heart some rest and some salve. And I think if it does that, well, it really doesn't. It's like placebo effect, right?
Yeah,
it's a similar thing. Yeah. If it works for you, it works. If it's not doing any harm, and it's not, like, I went to a clairvoyant once. He was so popular because he was so convincing and accurate. He was at the Royal College of Psychiatric. Not psychiatric. What do you call them? Anyway, the Royal College in London. He would only see you every 3 months as a minimum, as a maximum. You couldn't see him any more frequently, because people were getting addicted to him. And he recognised that. Plus, he was very popular. So, you know, if you feel you're connected to a loved one, of course, you're going to keep going back and back and back. And to an extent, Adele does that too. And when she realises that it might not be ongoing, it's a little bit of another grieving process for her. But she's got what she needed from it. So, you know, it is a process for her of disconnecting in a way and reaching an understanding and some acceptance. It doesn't mean you grieve any less for your lost loved one, but it's about healing yourself. So I think that process in itself is important. And also another way she does it, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, is you know, you've got the dark spots in this novel, but I really felt the need as a writer, and I'm sure a reader does as well, to lighten that up with some love, with some family, with some humour. You need that bright spot to understand the darkness a little more, and also to cope with it emotionally. So family is her big healing thing. And the love that comes in many forms, in her love for her nephew, her love for her brother and sister, and eventually the love she feels for another person. So all those forms of love heal us.
Yeah, this is a good mention a good time to actually shout out Jem, Adele's nephew that you just alluded to, because
he's a character, isn't he?
Oh yeah, and it's good because you need for because you're dealing with such intense subject matter, you need that contrast to highlight it, but also to also just not make the book such a downer if it's in that situation, because you need to have those moments of genuine love and care. And I think the scenes with Jem, for example, really nailed down another key theme of the story that really stood out for me, which is your examination of family, and specifically the value of family. Families are seen in many ways in this book. You know, there are situations of kind, of a kind family dynamic and circumstances, but there's also moments where it can get turned on its head a little bit as more kind of comes out. But there's also a highlighting of the impact of crime and how that affects a family dynamic, and how it can change a family dynamic in all its forms. Out of curiosity, has your opinion on the idea of family shifted since you dived into these themes when writing about it?
Well, that's right. Family is your blood, but, you know, your friends are who you choose. And I think in this day and age, with families being a lot smaller, people being childless, like a lot of my friends, when I came back from overseas, they were married with children and they were struggling with young families, and I lost touch with a lot of them in the intimate sense that I might have had when we were younger. And I ended up looking around me and suddenly I was surrounded by gay men and women because they were in my situation, and other single friends, of course. But and I explored that sense of family, that all of these people, like my friends had Christmases for waifs and strays, for example, to welcome those people in and say, we know you don't have family, but you've got us. And and there's also family that you might have in other community groups like religious organisations or wherever else you mix. Gaming groups seem to be a big thing now, because they say that loneliness is the cancer of this generation, because we're going to die. A lot of us will die on our own because we don't have children and we don't have many siblings. So we have to build up those communities around us to save us against that, I think.
Absolutely. And this now leads to probably one of the other really key points that I wanted to talk about, which is the element of women supporting women in this story. And this brings in a very key, important character, the detective sergeant, Sandra Berkeley. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sandra Bentley. Thank you. Yeah. Who, in addition, she's part of the grief support group that Adele attends, which sees these women cross paths. But she's also been involved in, as you mentioned, we mentioned at the top with the pitch. She's investigating the unsolved disappearances of 3 boys on the Heath, and I feel like the value of female comradeship is such a great influence to draw on. I think there are more and more and more great stories that are coming out that are incorporating this a lot more. I've got no comment really necessarily or a question to add here, but just that a key great thing that you did is we've got the perspective of Adele, but then we also, when the police drama and procedural element comes in, we're investigating these stories. You have that perspective, that POV of the detective sergeant as well, to contrast with, in her job to try and track these kids down. And that, for me, really nailed home that crime element. It is so valuable to have that in this story as a key contrast to the experience that Adele is happening. Tell me a bit about that. Tell me a bit about this detective sergeant and Sandra and her place in this story.
Well, Adele's going through a lot of emotional turmoils, ups and downs, and I think you don't want to put the reader through that roller coaster constantly. And Sandra is a very practical, pragmatic person. She's had her dramas in the past, but she's learnt the hard way to control herself a lot more, and she's in an occupation where that's forced on her too. But her passion is to bring someone to justice here, and that's her focus. In fact, she's a little bit obsessed with it. So she's the anchor and contrast to Adele, because she's bringing Adele back to the straight line, saying, listen, be practical. I need this information. Tell me what happened. Put your thoughts in order. Give me everything. And Adele is magnetized to Sandra in a way, because suddenly she's this lighthouse in the storm. It's like suddenly you're protecting me, or you're giving me direction, you're giving me some hope. And obviously, look, I'm reading a book at the moment called After Agatha. It's about women writing crime, and it's quite fascinating, the history and why women write crime, and more so why they're reading it. And one of the things is that that sense of resolution we get at the end of a story makes us feel safer. That justice has been restored to the world, because women feel more vulnerable or exposed to vulnerability more in their lives than men would be. So they live with that a lot more. And I think women crime writers are exploring that, particularly when you look at the advent of domestic noir. So the inside of the house behind closed doors is now being explored a lot more. And it's like, there's more there than we think. And women obviously relate to that. They find it very relatable. So to bring that person to justice, or shine a light on something that has been in a dark corner hitherto, that's very rewarding, I think, for a lot of readers. Some people, of course, don't want to go there, but that's the case with all sorts of reading, isn't it? I mean, I never read Stephen King for very good reasons. I like sleeping at night, but some people love it. So each to their own. But that exploration of feeling the fear and then getting to the resolution, I think is important for a lot of women readers, and the writers are now starting to cater to that, which I think's important. So yes, Xandra is in that world, but she's a strong character and a character I think that people will warm to in a way, even though she's not a terribly warm person per se, but she's caring. And there's one scene where she talks to Adele, where Adele says that Joe, the rector, and Xandra are the people that are saving her, and Xandra just throws it off lightly, saying, well, one's a minister of the Lord and I'm a minister of the law, so I'd hope so. But there's more to it than that.
I think it's because you understand where she's coming from. Like I think on that point that you mentioned, she is very closed off, but you can see just through her actions and what she is focusing on. She's someone who is heavily driven by quality, moral value, and values of looking after others. And I'm not surprised that people would be drawn to her, in all honesty, because I was drawn to her just because I'm seeing your actions in action. In a way, and what your actions are doing is saying everything about who you are and what your aspirations are in terms of trying to make the world and society a better place with your job, with what you do. So it is very notable. We will, like, on the subject of kind of closure and coming to closure, we like to keep things spoiler free here, but to say that the ending has a couple of big surprises in it is an understatement. There is a creeping set of dread that has come throughout this book that is paid off, and when it does. But what I did kind of do want to mention here is that there is an element of hope at the end of the book that I, as a reader, cling on to at the end of it. First of all, I'll just say I have no question. Well done. You ended this book great.
Oh, thank you.
It's a really good, it's a great ending. It's a really great ending to this book.
Thank you for that. I'm a writer that likes to know how a book ends before I really get into it, because I have to have that, a bit like Ian Foster says, you have to see that mountain peak in the distance, and that's where you're going. What steps you take to get there, you don't know. It could be a very roundabout method, and your characters will take you all over the houses. But I like to know the boom tish that I'm going to get at the end. And I must say my beta readers helped me a lot with that, because when I initially wrote my first draft, I thought, okay, that's the ending, but I'm not finding it satisfying as an author. And if I'm not finding it satisfying, the reader won't either. And I talked through with my beta readers, and they had some ideas, and, one just struck me, and I thought, what, that's what has to happen. And I rewrote the ending of it, and I was so pleased when I did, because it then had that boom tish that I was looking for. I mean, look, there's a lot of talk at the moment in the bookstagrammers about twists. Everything has to be twisty. And I even read in the ABC Book Club someone complaining about this, because they said, just by saying there's a twist stresses me out, because I spend the whole book looking for this twist.
Yeah, that's right. You're waiting
and I
for
thought,
it.
Well, that's ungrateful, isn't it?
Yeah, you spend, not only that, you spend the whole time waiting for it, and then when it comes, you already are prepared for it, so it therefore negates it being a twist in the first place, because you already know it's there.
That's what this person was getting at. Yeah, she said, if I'm looking for it, then I'd rather it not know that it's coming. So look, again, you can't please everybody, but look, it is becoming, it's almost like drugs. It's like the twists we got in the old books aren't enough. We want more and more and more and more. And as an author, I find that a little bit stressful, because you read some of the crime books that are out there at the moment, you think they're so bloody clever. How did they come up with this? And the stress to better that next time. Christian White's book's coming out. He's known as the king of the twist, and it's like, oh, what a reputation to have to live up to.
Yeah, maybe even the twist can be that there is no twist. It could sometimes be the solution. Christian, if you're listening, Just maybe try one of them.
And the other thing too is, I like to say that there's more than just having whodunits. There's how done it, there's what done it, there's other things, and sort of preparing your audience and saying there are other ways to look at a crime novel. It doesn't always have to be this twisty guessing game of who did it. There can be other aspects that provide suspense and tension and resolution as well.
As a kind of an endpoint on this, like, what did writing this book and sitting with these themes and this subject matter and everything else in between, what did it teach you as an author, sitting here and contemplating this subject matter?
Some of it was quite confronting, as you'd imagine. You always have your doubts as to whether you're representing someone's viewpoint authentically. And I spoke to quite a few people about that. So I hope that I've managed to pull that off. Sitting with that love of family and that backstop of support, how important that is. Yeah, look, there was quite a lot of things. And the women supporting the women I found quite critical as well. Exploring some thinking there and letting Adele explore that thinking of, are women better at something than men, or is it just that she found the right women? And, looking at the character of Stephen Lane, she has certain thoughts about him as well. And it's like, well, is that fair or is that right? Or, there's all sorts of things happening there, and it's trying not to stereotype a man's way of doing things over a woman's, because you've got overlap both ways. So I was quite conscious of not setting up archetypes as well as much as I could. Whether I've succeeded, we'll see.
I think you have. You've definitely created characters that we are drawn to, we sympathise with, we understand, and I think it's such an interesting, not just an interesting scenario that you've created, but also just that environment and how they react within that environment is so interesting. I know that there's a couple of things on the horizon for you. I know that you're going to continue to roll out promotion of this book, and I know that there's always another book in the fire behind. But I'd like to finish this podcast and this chat with you by simply asking, are you happy?
I like to be busy, and I like to be creative. Therefore, I must be happy.
You're happy when you're preoccupied.
Yes, but I have to find that vent. Being busy is an outlet for energy, but also that ability to know that I can have those quiet times and immerse myself in that, to go into the well, as they say. So the being busy sort of refreshes the well, because I'm not doing that sort of thing. By the time I sit down to do it, there's something there, and I can dredge it up. And once I start dredging it up, it comes up in buckets, and I can just dump it on the page. And then the challenge is shaping it and making it something palatable that's going to flow in a good narrative and a good plot. And beefing that out. So I love that process. The editing process I don't like so much. I know some writers love it. I wish I could find someone to do more of that for me. We should team up.
I love the editing. I know. I love the editing process. I love getting the first draft out is a nightmare for me. And then once you have this splodge, I'm just like, oh yeah, we can play with it and move it around like this. It'd be great. It's the other way around. Alicia, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you for this opportunity to check out, to give me the opportunity to check this book out, X. It is a haunting, chilling, but ultimately incredibly rewarding read, and I think you should be very proud of it.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you for the generous interview, and thank you for your enthusiasm. It's always wonderful to meet someone who's read the book and actually got something out of it. I often sign books and say, I hope you find something to like in this, because that's, to me, that's an achievement. You don't always expect people to love the whole book, but you want them to find some element that they like or can relate to. And I think that's the achievement, because you're looking for that speck of something in someone else that you're connecting to. And that's always really rewarding.
And I certainly hope that a lot of readers or listeners who are listening to this podcast also get the chance to check this book out and also get the chance to have a read of it and connect with it themselves. For those listening, X is published by 9 Star Press. You can get a copy of it. You can buy it. It's out now. It's down in the description. Alicia's holding a copy of it up on YouTube right now, so you can see what it looks like. You can check it out. It's also in selected bookstores as well. If you like books and you like book podcasts, you can check me out. I'm on Date with a Debut, which is also on the Words and Nerds channel. We chat about debut novelists, their books, and their journey to publication. It's a hell of a lot of fun. And if you like Words and Nerds in general, there's a lot of great authors out there. Danny V is hustling as all hell. She is fantastic and does an amazing job with this platform. Drop us a review. Leave us 5 stars. Leave us a thumbs up. Wherever you are listening, thanks for listening to us, and thank you for supporting Australia's incredible book industry and for amazing books like X. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.